be like the main question I think I would have, out of that whole story with Kodak Black and that lady. It's like, how do you know if you're reading the signals properly? Sometimes you may, man, I got a whole story about being mortified one time misreading the signals. Okay. So I'll leave that where it is. On the edge of a Polish forest. So as you guys know, shout out to the Crime and Investigations channel. Hey guys, as you guys know, it's been a lot of conversation and a lot of talk about Russia, the Ukraine, Russia invading the Ukraine, and we're starting to see a little movement today. This is what you call war games, right? This is what you call war games, and Russia's really good at it, right? You guys remember that movie, War Games? I think it was back in 84, 85 when that movie was made. War games is a common thing that Russia does, in which they sort of poke and prod and jab at people. But the only issue with their poking and prodding and jabbing is there's war as a possibility, right? And so there's absolutely no question that Putin has been, can I just say this? He's been nuts drag the ground, okay? He has been letting his nuts drag the ground. And that is a statement of he's been swinging his power around the last several months. And actually this last several years, he's sort of been on the cusp, or he's had the United States on the cusp of, is he going to invade the Ukraine? He annexed Crimea. Ukraine's up, for a little bit extra attention now. But let's just take note of a few things that are sort of peeking out in the news, because the same way that these celebrities play with these blogs, okay, when they want to get a narrative out, when they want to get a certain statement out, the same way these celebrities will play with these blogs is the same way that our political governments like to play with these news organizations. It's just that instead of it being radaronline.com or TMZ, it's the New York Times, right? More prestigious, so to speak. Now, as of this morning, after a ramp up in tension, Biden did a press conference yesterday afternoon. Tensions have been ramping up. As of today, right now, 10:02 a.m., Russia is claiming that it is withdrawing some troops following drills around Ukraine that have been met with skepticism from Western leaders who have called for proof, with the U.S. Secretary of State saying they haven't seen a meaningful pullback of Russian forces. This is like Russia's way of pulling back, but not wanting to like save face, right? It's war games, right? These are war games. And it's I bet there's been a lot of sleepless nights in Washington this week. I bet you that. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden said there was still plenty of room for diplomacy with Russia to avoid a conflict in Europe. That's Biden's way and America's way of saying, okay, we see you, we hear you. We're not trying to strike you right now. There is time for diplomacy. We really would like to be diplomatic if possible. We really would love to avoid a war. Again, 10,000 U.S. troops have been chosen and are currently on standby to be deployed to Ukraine, not to the Ukraine, but to areas close to, I should say, NATO-led areas, so to speak. America said they're not going to be putting any of our soldiers actually on the ground there, right? It's all war games. So an apparent cyber attack hit Ukraine's defense ministry and armed forces and 2 Ukraine banks on Tuesday. And so that's another element to add to the mix. And I think the reason why they sort of add that to the mix is because Russia's gotten really good at their cyber warfare. gotten really good at it. Now, 23 minutes ago, the State Department released a spokesperson from the State Department released some additional information saying that the United States' concern over continued buildup of Russian forces has, quote, not abated a single bit, end quote. This is from the State Department. There's been no meaningful sign of de-escalation, no meaningful Russian troop withdrawals from the border. So basically, you can kind of take from this that we want to see, the United States wants to see Russia back off, withdraw. Russia's sort of saying that they are withdrawing, and the United States is trying to put a little pressure on them. Hey, Occupy, what's up? Now, the fact that Putin can take any number of courses where he chooses to do so, that is what gives us profound concern. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this morning, that there has been no meaningful pullback of Russian forces, despite Russian President Vladimir Putin's announcement Tuesday that Russia was sending some troops back to base after completing drills. Yeah, so Putin is like, what are y'all talking about? Hey, what are y'all talking about? We're not trying to do anything with Ukraine. What do you mean? We're just doing some drills, right? We're just drilling. We're just doing some drills. We're just drilling and drilling and drilling. Quote, listen to this. This is Jim Scudo on Wednesday, CNN's Jim Scudo. We have continued to see Russian forces flow to the border. We've continued to see Russians along the border actually move into fighting positions. We know the Russian playbook. We know the Russians engage in misinformation and disinformation. We have good reason to believe the Russians are saying one thing and doing another in an effort to obfuscate, in an effort to hide the truth. The threat is very real. We know that the playbook could include everything from cyber attacks to electronic warfare to aerial bombardment to a large-scale incursion. We are prepared for every eventuality. While it remains the strong preference to find a diplomatic solution, the Russians will need to de-escalate and take meaningful steps that they have yet to take. So that's us, the United States, trying to say, yeah, we're not feeling it, right? No. Just having paid attention to this topic for so long, and you got to get older, and you know that when you see the United States make statements, you can't even necessarily believe them either. I'm just saying. I think, and listen, I'm not going against my country when I say this, and I really almost feel weird about saying this, but Putin does have some concerns that he has expressed, specifically about the placement of U.S. troops and other things that Biden did not necessarily speak on, like the U.S. base on the edge of a Polish forest. A Polish archaeologist and television journalist walks his dog each morning through a forest near his home on NATO's eastern flank, wandering along the edge of a green chain link fence topped with razor wire. He enjoys the fresh air, the morning quiet, until the loudspeakers on the other side of the fence, strung with keep out signs in Polish, English, German and Russian start blasting the Star-Spangled Banner at high volume. The fence is the outer perimeter guarded by Polish soldiers of a highly sensitive U.S. military installation expected to be operational this year, which Washington has insisted will help defend Europe and the United States from ballistic missiles fired by rogue states like Iran. But for President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia, the military base in Poland and another in Romania are evidence of what he sees as the threat posed by NATO's eastward expansion. And part of this justification for his military encirclement of Ukraine. The Pentagon describes the two sites as defensive and unrelated to Russia. But the Kremlin believes they could be used to shoot down Russian rockets or to fire offensive cruise missiles at Moscow. As he threatens Ukraine, Mr. Putin has demanded that NATO reduce its military footprint in Eastern and Central Europe, which Washington and European leaders have flatly refused to do. Mr. Putin has been fuming about American missiles near Russia's border since the Romanian site went into operation in 2016. But the Polish facility, located near the village of Redzikowo, is only about 100 miles from Russian territory and barely 800 miles from Moscow itself. Imagine being listen, y'all know I'm all about country, okay? I'm United States all day. But is it okay to throw criticism at the United States in times like this? I think so. And one thing I just want the, Pentagon and the United States military to keep in mind is that all over the world, the United States is seen as a bully. And the way that you may be seeing things may not be the way that other countries and other places and presidents and y'all, the world is much bigger than the United States of America. Look at all the countries that we've decimated. And now none of us will ever step foot in any of these places. Has absolute no impact to our daily life. Like, I don't know, Afghanistan, for example, have absolutely no plans to ever step foot in Afghanistan. Okay, I'm just giving an example. But again, we have decimated places time after time after time after time again. And the one thing I can say about Putin is he sort of wants to be seen as standing against the bully, so to speak. And he does refer to the United States as bullies. I've seen him make speeches time and time again in the past and during his inaugurations, during various different press events, pressers or whatnot. I've seen him speak on these certain things and tactics that he doesn't like that the United States does, but also at the same time, right? Again, Putin plays a lot of war games. Can I just throw Syria into the mix here, Mr. Putin, sir? The chemical weapons that your country has. I'm back, guys. I'm back. Looks like they good to know. US just ordered the arrest of the ex-president of Honduras. Interesting. Um, I sort of got kicked off there, didn't I? Okay, let me finish what I'm saying here. All right. So I said all that, again, the Syria thing that's going on. There's just a lot of crazy stuff going on. But listen, Putin spoke on this back in December at an annual news conference and said, quote, "Are we deploying missiles near the US border? No, we are not. It is the United States that has come to our home with its missiles and is already standing at our doorstep." And Putin said this again in December at his annual news conference. Now, this Polish base, the heart of which is a system known as Aegis Ashore, contains sophisticated radars capable of tracking hostile missiles and guiding interceptor rockets to knock them out of the sky. It is also equipped with missile launchers known as Mk-41s, which the Russians worry can be easily repurposed to fire offensive missiles like the Tomahawk. Now, this is the perimeter fence at this U.S. base, again, in the NATO eastern flank. And the United States, Biden, Secretary of State, is planning to deploy these 10,000 troops under the guise of NATO and putting these 10,000 troops on the NATO eastern flank. Now, for villagers in Rest, are living at the forefront of Mr. Putin's oft-stated security concerns has already caused jitters for some local residents. A civil engineer who works in construction said a customer who reserved an apartment in a new block his company is building recently called to cancel her planned purchase because of worries that Russia could strike the missile defense facility and send property values through the floor. Nobody really thinks that is likely because it would put Russia into direct conflict with NATO, of which Poland has been a member since 1999. But assumptions of a unified and peaceful Europe that took hold with the end of the Cold War are crumbling as Russian troops mass on the border with Ukraine. And the United States sends thousands of additional soldiers to Poland. Now, Mr. Kwiatkowski, who took part in protests against the American facility, when it was announced in 2016, said Russia had stoked unease by exaggerating the threat posed by NATO. But he added both sides have created a self-propelling machine of fear, fueled by nerve-jangling uncertainty over what the other is up to. And I would agree with that, for sure. Thomas Graham, who served as senior director for Russia on President George Bush's National Security Council, said Moscow has never believed Washington's assurances that its missile defense system was aimed at Iran, not Russia. The issue, he added, had become a powerful symbol for the Kremlin of a post-Cold War order that it views as dangerously one-sided, in which it is now trying to revise through military threats. Moscow wants to shut the site down. The United States doesn't want to shut the site down. Matter of fact, they're just sort of ramping up with the site. If that's to be put under consideration to help sort of de-escalate this situation, is that possibly something that, a strategic place that could be put into consideration of maybe not launching both bases, maybe just one of them or something like that? I don't know. What do they call it? Conflict resolution? issue for Russia, says Casimir Pulaski Foundation, a Warsaw research group. By shutting down this site as Moscow wants, he added, it is a red line that the United States and Poland will not cross, though NATO, in response to a list of demands made by Moscow in December, recently offered discussion of an unspecified transparency mechanism in the hope of calming Russian concerns over the Polish and Romanian sites. But Moscow wants much more than that. Missile defense has long been viewed by Russia as a dangerous American attempt to degrade the main guarantor of its great power status, a vast nuclear arsenal. The possibility that the United States could shoot down Russian ballistic missiles undermines the deterrent doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which posts that neither of the two biggest nuclear powers would ever risk a nuclear war because it would mean both get annihilated. Again, the possibility that the United States could shoot down Russian ballistic missiles undermines the deterrent doctrine of mutually assured destruction, meaning neither of the two biggest nuclear powers would ever risk a nuclear war because it would mean both get annihilated. During the Cold War, Russia and the United States both worked on developing anti-missile defenses, but agreed in 1972 to abandon their rocket shield programs so as to preserve mutual vulnerability, and they hoped peace. Now, these are Soviet military graves at a cemetery in this little town during the Cold War. Russia and the United States both worked on developing anti-missile defenses again, but agreed to abandon those programs. It worked for nearly 30 years, but at the end of Mr. Putin's first year as president in December 2001, President George Bush infuriated the new Russian leader by pulling out of the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty and directing the Pentagon to build a system to ward off the possible threat of missiles from Iran. The U.S. withdrawal from what had been a cornerstone of superpower relations for decades has since been cited repeatedly by the Kremlin as the start of its disenchantment with the United States and Mr. Putin's belief that Russian interests are being needlessly trampled. Quote, "We tried for a long time to persuade our partners not to do this," end quote. And this is what Mr. Putin said in the Kremlin just this past month. Nevertheless, the United States did what it did, withdrew from the treaty. Now anti-ballistic missile launchers are deployed in Romania and are being set up in Poland. Should the Ukraine draw closer to NATO, Mr. Putin thundered, it will be filled with weapons. Modern offensive weapons will be deployed on its territory, just like in Poland and Romania. The Aegis Ashore site in Romania has been operating for 5 years without incident. But Russia views the Polish missile defense facility, previously stalled by construction and other problems, as a more serious menace. This weapon system was installed, or the weapon system was installed last summer in the facility, which is scheduled to start working sometime this year. Rear Admiral Tom Drugan, the program's director, said in November, quote, "It is specifically not focused on threats out of Russia, despite what they say," end quote. American assurances that only Iran need worry were undermined during the Trump administration when the president stated that U.S. missile defense systems would detect and destroy any missile launched against the United States, anywhere, anytime, any place. And that is why a president must watch the words that they say. That is why Trump was horrible for any sort of military, anything. I think he sort of leaned on the generals in the military, members in the high-ranking military members, because he wanted to look all bad and tough. But he's not even in office anymore, and the words that he said is coming back and biting us still. You have to understand that the whole time, the whole 4 years that Trump was in there as president, of course Russia was poking and prodding. Let him talk. Let him talk. Let's see, what is he going to say? Because whatever he's going to say is going to tell us a whole lot about what the United States is doing, because the dude talks too much, too open, too freely. Just an example of how the things the president can say, even after that president has left office, and how that can come back and bite you. Your entire country now being mentioned in the cusp of a possible invasion into the Ukraine, a possible war. Washington has struggled to convince Mr. Putin that its two missile defense systems in Eastern Europe do not have an offensive capability that could easily be turned against Russian targets. They want the site closed down. The United States says they're not going to close this site down. And so, I wanted to come up and talk about this concern. There's a link to the article in the chat. Feel free to take a look at it. Again, this is Aegis Ashore. It's called the Aegis Ashore site, and it is in Poland. Now, this site, again, is operated by the United States Navy. And so far, only American military personnel have been allowed anywhere near the launchers or their control units. A lot of finger pointing going on between Moscow and Washington. But this village is now a potential target in the event of war. Just something, I wanted to sprinkle on in there in regards to what's going on with this whole situation. Keep your eyes on CNN, I think, has a running blog, like updating it regularly. And of course, before we get up out of here, just watch how these political government organizations move. So now all of a sudden, right, a minute ago, we've got news reports coming out. U.S. Navy aircraft had an extremely close encounter with multiple Russian military jets over the Mediterranean. Top Senate Republican praises President Biden's speech on Russia. Of course, you would expect the Republicans to be tougher than anyone else, as far as parties are concerned. All the way back to concern over continued buildup of Russian forces. Basically, the United States saying, nope, you have not abated our fears at all. So anyway, guys, there you go. There's a late update for you. Those of you in the LeaQ family, and those of you over at the Crimes and Investigations site. And until next time, you guys, I'll holler at you then.